Thank you for downloading this Realagriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
I'm Sean Haney, and this is Realag on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. Realag on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to Realag on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. I'm your host, Sean Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Hope you had yourself a great week. It is great to be here with you today. We've got a lot of ground to cover. It was a big week in the news, mainstream and in agriculture specifically. And we're going to try to cover as many of the different angles as we possibly can today on the program. We're going to cover the cattle markets with Ann Wasco, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. We're going to talk about strong beef demand. Very encouraging, especially given some of these high prices and the price of beef relative to the price of pork and chicken. Beef performing very well. Also, strong numbers at the auction mart for feeder animals as well. So good times right now economically for the rancher. We're also going to hear from Neil Townsend of Grain Fox. We're going to talk about some of the grain markets. I want to cover some of the canola issues and the canola balance sheet. Some thinking that canola is a little bit lower on the production number than we first thought. Some reports of less than 18 million metric tons. I'll ask Neil about that and some of the strategies going forward. A lot of talk about some Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola coming. Remember, there's that anti-dumping investigation that's happening. We've also got Minister McCauley over in China to try to deal with maybe some of those issues, like those coming tariffs on Canadian canola. We'll have to see what the outcome is there. We'll also talk today to Greg Northey of Pulse Canada. You know, I think Canadians have kind of become a little bit numb to some of the strike action that's been happening. You kind of get lost in all of it, especially when it comes to some of the ports, because there's different unions and different workers. It's just not one union representing all the workers at the ports. Like, I thought we already sorted out this Vancouver thing. No, this is a different area of the workforce. It's really impacting container shipments at Vancouver and at Montreal. That impacts the IP bean industry in Eastern Canada and also impacts, made in Saskatchewan pulses, grown in Saskatchewan pulses. They leave in containers, not necessarily in bulk shipments. And so container traffic has really been impacted here. We're going to hear from Greg Northey on that. Now, if you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, you can call the Realag feedback line, 855-776-6147. On the news front in Saskatchewan, new ag minister. Cattle rancher who also spent more than 30 years working in the oil industry has been named as Saskatchewan's new ag minister. This is a story on RealAgriculture.com. Premier Scott Moe unveiled his new, slightly smaller cabinet on Thursday following a fifth consecutive Saskatchewan party win in the provincial election last month. Daryl Harrison, who has served as the MLA for Kennington in the southeast corner of the province since 2020, was appointed to the agricultural post. Harrison was previously legislative secretary for value-added agriculture and livestock engagement and has served as municipal councillor, a school trustee, and a director with the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association. David Merritt, who served as Saskatchewan's ag minister for the past 6 years, 6 years, the time flies. He became the Minister of Highways and Minister of Sask Builds and Procurement. Warren Kading from Churchbridge will re-enter cabinet as Minister of Trade and Export Development. I know Warren from his old seed. When I was a seed grower and he was a seed grower, I used to do some business with Warren. So congratulations to Warren Kading on re-entering cabinet. Most said the government is planning to hold a fall sitting, and the date for the throne speech will be announced soon. Who else we have here? Minister of Health will be Jeremy Cockrill. Minister of Mental Health and Addiction, Seniors and Rural and Remote Health is Lori Carr. I mentioned David Merritt. Jeremy Harrison is the Minister of Crown Investment Corporation, all of its commercial Crown corporations, and the Minister responsible for the Public Service Commission. Minister of Energy and Resources, Colleen Young. Ken Cheveldayoff is Minister of Advanced Education. So we've got the full list of the cabinet at realagriculture.com. And of course, another big news item, more national in scope and international in scale, I guess, is the U.S. election. And, there was polls saying that the Electoral College could, President-elect Trump could see a victory there. There was also polls showing that, Kamala Harris, vice president, could also win. I don't think anybody had on their bingo card winning the popular vote by, I think right now it's like by 4 million votes last time I checked. So, that has been a big surprise this week. Now, what the cabinet looks like, especially with the Republicans controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, what the cabinet looks like is going to be quite fascinating here. A lot of discussion about Robert Lighthizer coming back to be the U.S. Trade Representative. That may be more impactful than whoever the Secretary of Agriculture is. There's a lot of different names on who is going to be the USDA secretary. Encourage you to go to realagriculture.com. Kelvin and I put together a list of prospective names on who could be the USDA secretary. And what's interesting about that list, you're going to recognize some names and some are going to be new to you. We do have descriptions of all those names on their backgrounds and why they may be a fit or why not. It's a pretty wide swath in terms of philosophy. So depending on who is selected and who's going to be the name going forward, USDA could take a really different path than if one of the other names was going to be selected. There's a lot of rumors flying around, as you can imagine, but I think that's going to be the direction of the USDA going forward is really going to be based. I think we're going to get real indication based on the name. Typically what happens here is you'll get about 4 or 5 names, and they're all kind of similar in philosophy and background, and there's not a lot of, the standard deviation is pretty low when it comes to the differences. This is not the case in this regard. I think it's a pretty wide open playing field that is going to have impacts on Canada. And of course, Minister Macaulay from Canada is going to have to, work with the USDA secretary in trying to sort out some trade issues, because there's some trade issues coming. Obviously, there is the issues on Canadian dairy, but there's going to be a lot of challenges when it comes to Canadian canola going to the U.S. and participating in SAF and renewable diesel as well. There's a lot of canola crush capacity that is in Saskatchewan based on accessing that U.S. market. That's going to be an issue that is going to have to be sorted out under this new administration. Well, hey, let's take a break. And when we come back, we got Ann Wasco of the Gateway Livestock Exchange joining us right after this.
Invest in your farm's future by donating to the Acres for Education campaign. Your charitable donation will get students out of the classroom, giving them real-life experiences that will shape their views on agriculture. Learn more at aitc.sk.ca.
If you're serious about agriculture, Realag's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at realagriculture.com through daily newsletters, and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the Realag community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains. Hey Realag listeners, Cantera Seeds has 8 bags of their new CS4100 LL Liberty Link canola available to be won by one lucky listener. Visit Cantera.com/realag, find out more, and to enter.
And welcome back to Realag on the weekend here on 650 CQM and 980 CGME. I'm your host, Sean Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Hey, next we're going to hear the beef market update we do every 2 weeks on RealAgriculture.com. It's with Ann Wasco of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Of course, Ann also ranches in East End, Saskatchewan. Longtime veteran of the cattle analyst trade. Fantastic work. Lots of insights. Lots happening in the cattle markets. Let's hear what Ann Wasco had to say about this week's beef markets.
Good day, Sean. I'm good.
Well, can you believe we're already into November?
I can't.
Nuts.
Yesterday, we processed bred heifers in shirts, no jackets.
Yeah, you're just in t-shirts.
Yes, great.
In early November in southwestern Saskatchewan.
Yeah, exactly. Crazy.
Wow, that is crazy. Okay, prices. What's going on south of the border and then to Canada?
Well, the U.S. really, we haven't seen much in terms of trade. Really nothing substantial to report yet. And I think it goes back, Sean, the last couple of weeks, packers in the U.S. bought quite a few cattle, so they didn't come into this week really needing a bunch. Early bids from the packer are off about $1, $1 to $2 lower. So we'll see what today brings. I think we'll see trade by the end of today, but as we speak, we're not there. If it were $1 lower, the South would be 189, just so listeners have an idea what we're talking about, but nothing yet. I think one of the reasons that packers are maybe dragging their feet a wee bit this week is that choice cutout, which has gotten super strong over the last month, but it's lost $8 this week. And so we've got it closing the choice at 309.5. That select spread is 30 back, so we've still got strong demand on those choice and prime middles. So the middle meats have been holding their own in terms of that cutout, but I think what we're seeing is the end meats and that 90s, that trim, have really backed off from those. And so when you I mean, the middles carry a lot, but they can't carry it all. So we've got this weakness happening. And so we're off pretty good, especially compared to a couple of weeks ago on the ends and the 90s.
But demand has, still, we are feeling very good about where demand has been, given where these prices have been in.
2024, and we've talked about it a few times, and here we're into the 11th month of the year, has been substantially better from a beef demand perspective than I think any one of us would have predicted as we came into the year with these higher retail prices. But again, as supplies start to come off, and I'm talking about from a big perspective, North America wide, and of course the cow market, cow kill way off, and so we had this big strength on the trims and the chuck to support that 90s trim. So there was lots of reasons for what was going on, but it has, in no question, has been an amazing demand year that has been stronger than any of us thought.
But we have September retail beef prices, and what are they?
we now from a Canadian perspective, we just got from StatsCan September retail beef and pork and chicken, $24.88 a kg for beef. What is that? That's 7% higher than August, the previous month.
Wow.
It's 6% higher than year to date. So that's one thing. Pork is up 4% year to date. Chicken's down 6%. So let's go back. And so this is an all-time high. This September price for beef is an all-time high at the counter. Pork, all-time highs at retail, still go back to that ASF years of 2014, 15, 16. So pork hasn't hit those highs yet. And chicken last August was in Canada was still our record chicken prices. So beef's a little bit out there on its own little limb right now, if you will. And could be, we talk about stretching the band, could be stretching that band as we speak.
But the great news, but holding, right? That's the part that it's been sustained demand.
Yes.
It isn't like, there's some sort of shock and people are just trying to fill their freezers and we sort of have this, fake lead up. This is like sustained, strong demand, people seeing not only the health benefits of beef, but the taste, obviously, and even with some of the prices. That is amazing to me. And I think most people, we go back 1 year, 2 years, they're taking the under if they were betting on demand.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this has been, now we'll talk more about 2025 as we get closer to the end of the year, as we usually do on this show. But that'll be the next challenge, because in order to support higher cattle prices again in 25, So we know supplies are going to come down a bit. We're going to have to keep inching these prices at retail higher again. So, but we'll be watching the economy in terms of how do the American Canadian consumers feel. Interest rates are starting to come down a bit. So then that whole economic picture should be supportive. It would be the guess today.
Well, one of the things that I have said is, I've seen mainstream, consumer commentary and some of the main pubs talk about, geez, we need more supply because these prices are so high. Well, we have to have these prices to encourage more supply. We also need Mother Nature to cooperate on a consistent basis, but that's the financial reality and how the market works. And the cycle for cattle is, it's extended. It's much longer than, say, poultry from a ramp up or ramp down
exactly.
Perspective. Now, auction marts, we're fall run, price there, ranch. Yeah. Yes. Love it.
Love it. And so here we are in November. This calf and feeder market's just holding super strong. And actually, after both those classes kind of made a bit of a September low, kind of got a little dreary in there, we've actually moved both of those markets higher. Extremely not seasonal or normal for calf prices to move higher into October, November, but they have. And so just looking at a 5.5 weight, this is an Alberta steer price, we're about $30 a hundred higher than what they were back in September. I think we're going to see the Canfax average probably come off near $4.30 a hundred for that 5.5 weight average in Alberta. 850s are about $10 higher than their September low. So these are good moves. Just not typical. So on average, if you compare where a calf price is today to where it was this same week last year, we're about $45 a hundred higher. So that's $250 a head. So wow. It's been an amazing run. Now here, this will be supportive to it as well. Our auction market volume last week was above the 5-year average, but otherwise since August 1, we're down 28% in auction volume. So the numbers are showing there's smaller numbers coming to town, and that's certainly supporting this market.
Now, does that auction mart flow, is that just physical auctions or is that also electronic auctions as well?
This number is just the physical cattle that are coming through. So yeah. So if we're not counting the cows that traded back in this, on the videos and stuff earlier on. So this is just talking about what's coming through the market today.
Wow. Okay. That's definitely something to follow. Yeah. And I think on the minds right now, a lot of producers, well, probably quite frankly on both sides of the board because of what we call the integrated supply chain, we got some trade talk to discuss here over the future number of months here. And I've heard from a number of Canadian cattle producers, as have you, some uncertainty, and that could have an impact on the cattle market as well.
Well, yeah, anytime we have a change of administration, this is what we go through. And so certainly lots of things have been said in the campaign in terms of what the plans will be. So we'll have to see where those come. And I know our association leaders and our feds and our provinces will be getting their ducks in a row, and we need to, because there will be a change. There's, as we've seen this administration before, we'll see it again, but probably with different, a little bit maybe different focus than what we would have seen in 2016. So certainly lots of things to watch. I think you and I talked about this before we got on the call, but not complacency, right? I think we need to be proactive on this at all levels.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about putting the numbers together. I've given this example lots. You think about some of the U.S. The U.S. packing plants and how they rely or they really have interests, and those plants are justified based on live cattle coming out of Canada to those plants, and that those are American jobs. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this, as there's a lot of flow back and forth, not only of live animals, but also finished product in a box.
Absolutely.
As well. Yeah. And have yourself a great weekend. All the best to you, and enjoy this great November weather we're having.
I will. Same to you, Sean. Thank you.
That was Ann Wasco, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. We'll be right back here on Realag on the weekend on 650 CQM and 980 CGME. Realag Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays we'll cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the Realag Issues panel with Kelvin Hefner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcasts. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
You deal with many uncertainties on your farm, but managing risk should not be one of them. MNP's Ag Team specializes in risk management. Visit mnp.ca to learn how you can stay ahead of the game and plan for the unknown.
Some very consequential strike action and labor disputes happening from an export perspective. And I think we're becoming a little bit sort of, numb to the amount of labor issues that Canada is still currently having. Like, we came out of the rail strike. It was binding arbitration was forced. We had the port issue in the U.S. We've had kind of some rolling strikes at the Port of Montreal. We've now got issues at the Port of Vancouver again. And right now with Montreal and Vancouver, it's really impacting containers. Now, that doesn't impact bulk shipments of grain, but it impacts things like IP soybeans in Montreal that go in a container, as well as some of the pulse products that leave Western Canada go through Vancouver. It's not getting a lot of attention. Well, earlier this week, Lindsay Smith of Real Agriculture had a chance to talk to Greg Northey of Pulse Canada about the issue and how it's concerning the pulse industry.
Yeah, so very important. So Montreal, so there's two terminals. So we're talking container terminals that are on strike. And then we've had the other two major terminals now are under embargo by the railways. So there's no strike at them, but traffic can't flow to them. So effectively, Montreal is shut down. And if we think about at least for pulse crops or the wider grain industry, there's about 3 million tons of grain that's exported in containers. And about a third of that goes through Montreal. And so the same ratio would be for pulses. We have about 500,000 tons of pulses that would go through Montreal. And importantly, the things that would go through Montreal, like beans, particularly, they only go through by container. We're not bulk shipping beans. And so at the moment, the only options are, Halifax, St. John, maybe Philadelphia. But right, effectively, that pipeline is shut down out of Montreal. So, a third to a half of all pulses and a third of all grain that moves in container out of Montreal has stopped.
So before we talk about Vancouver, one follow-up then to that. So you mentioned, there may be other options for some of this to go to, but that I'm going to assume adds time, adds costs, and I'm going to assume those ports are not necessarily as equipped to handle the volume. Like, there's a reason we go through the Port of Montreal.
Yeah, for sure. And, exactly. There's a reason we go through Montreal. There's the facilities there. There's transloaders, et cetera, that are adept at handling grain, and, having to move to the eastern ports or into the U.S. just creates a whole nother set of logistical challenges. And so nothing changes quickly. And we're talking very marginal amounts that could move to those other options. So it is a problem for sure.
And what about timing? Because, certainly from the Ontario perspective, IP beans, we know, go through Montreal. Yeah. A lot of them go very soon after harvest, if not at harvest, which just wrapped up. So timing wise, this seems to me like probably the worst or close to the worst time of year for this to be happening as well.
Yeah, pretty much. Whether it's Montreal or Vancouver, which we can get to, but this is the time, when pulses or beans want to move, and it's a peak season. It's well known, um, and more recently, the big challenge for us has been logistical bottlenecks that have reduced sort of the amount, like our export programs, right? So we have enough that we could be moving more, but we can't, and now this obviously just creates a whole nother headache, and everything that needs to move is probably under contract. And as you start to miss those contracts, you start to pay more money and demurrage and everything else. And so labor is always an issue, but we're like a broken record here. But this is like this time of the year particularly is really problematic.
Right. Okay. Now, Port of Vancouver, but it's not just the Port of Vancouver. This is BC ports.
Yeah.
That means Prince Rupert as well. So that would be containerized traffic as well, is my understanding. So we did get news yesterday that the BC maritime employers have locked out staff, but the staff, of course, had also served strike notice. So similar to what we saw with the railway strike, we had a lockout and a strike happening simultaneously. But this impacts, of course, all the ports in BC. So, and as I mentioned, the railway strike, and of course, there was a port strike at Vancouver prior to this earlier in September. So where are we at as far as ports in Vancouver, generally speaking? Just how serious is this work stoppage?
Yeah, it's really serious. So the only thing that isn't affected is bulk grain movement.
Right.
But otherwise, everything that's going through Vancouver. So we're talking about the terminals that would be moving bulk, potash and sulfur and everything else have all shut down. Anything that's moving canola oil, for instance, would be closed. And then all the container terminals. So anything that's moving in container from pulses or grain is closed. And that's both in Vancouver and Prince Rupert. So, and anything automotive, pretty much everything other than bulk grain and cruise ships, is going to be impacted by this. And so obviously, big impact. Like I said, Vancouver is half of what we would be exporting in containers moving through Vancouver. And then another portion of that, another, quarter would be going through Prince Rupert, roughly, about 2 million tons between the two ports, in a good year. So yeah, it's a real problem. And, to put it in perspective at least from the pulse perspective, we have things like peas that would be moving a lot of bulk, right? So not as much container movement, something like lentils, red lentils particularly, 50 to 60% of all red lentils would be moving in container, so those would not be moving. And then 100% of mustard, green lentils, green peas would be moving in container. And so, it's disproportionately impacting, the small, medium-sized exporters and farmers, right, who are growing those products because, quite literally, they're just not going to go anywhere if they were going to go through Vancouver. And the options out west become very limited, right? You could maybe go into the US and try and get them out, but again, we're talking marginal opportunities. So it's a real problem.
So there's two parts I want to talk about on this. One, closer to home, from the perspective of what Pulse Canada does, from the lobbying perspective of how important it is to keep traffic moving. What is happening right now is, are the conversations that the government needs to step in? What are these conversations this week sounding like?
Yeah, I mean, we've been since last week. We've been speaking with government, sending many letters. We have letters we signed with coalitions of different groups. It's probably about 5 different letters from interested business groups that we've been a part of, and sort of drawing attention to the issue. Part of the problem, I think, or at least last week, was there wasn't a ton of awareness about this, and even government was, not sure about the impact. And so it's been really important to at least raise the profile for one. We are launching another campaign around this at stopthelockout.ca, and so because it's really important that we found in these strikes, while it can be exhausting to do some of these things, because we're having to do them so often. Having government hear from many, many people on how important this is really important. And yeah, asking government to intervene is key here. One of the issues we're seeing with the Vancouver lockout is that the union there has been found by the Canadian Industrial Relations Board to be bargaining in bad faith on 3 different occasions, right? So there was a ruling by that board, 2 weeks ago saying bargaining is not happening in good faith. And so it's clear that those negotiations are broken, right? And so at that point, either government or anybody else saying there has to be a negotiated outcome, it's not really clear there could ever be a negotiated outcome. Right. And so at that point, it's imperative for government to step in. They can either, back to work legislation, I think would be very difficult because I'm not sure there's, political support for that on the other parties. But they could certainly try and use the Section 107 tool that they use with the rail strike. But whatever they choose, I mean, we're asking for all those things, but it has to happen quickly because the longer this goes on, the more damaging it becomes.
That was Lindsay Smith of Real Agriculture talking to Greg Northey of Pulse Canada. If you want to hear that entire interview between Lindsay and Greg, you can go to realagriculture.com. And like I said, I think we're becoming a little bit. I was having a conversation last night with a friend of mine in the grain sector, and we were talking about how, I think people are kind of numb to it. We're sort of striked out. And it's important because we got customers around the world. They depend on the product. And if we can't get containers out of the ports, it's a little hard for people to depend and purchase Canadian products. So whoever's right, whoever's wrong, it doesn't matter. We just want this to be concluded, fixed, and shipments can resume under normal circumstances. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Realag on the weekend, and we're going to talk markets when we come back right after this.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
Welcome back to Realag on the weekend here on 650 CQM and 980 CGME. I'm your host, Sean Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Earlier this week on the Realag Radio podcast, had a chance to chat with Neil Townsend of GrainFox, a commodity analyst out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Lots happening in the grain markets, and post-U.S. election, there's more to happen. What are some of the outcomes, and how do farmers move through this period of a lot of uncertainty, supply and demand, and trying to sort out what is the best way to manage their risk level when it comes to marketing, for some of you, maybe 23 crop, definitely 24, and even thinking ahead to 25. Here's a portion of my conversation with Neil Townsend of GrainFox.
The questions I would have for, say, the next 24 months and beyond is, obviously, global trade relationships between China and the U.S., that's the headline. How belligerent is it going to get? The other question I think we should all have, and this is something that's unfolding in real time, is just what will China look like in 24 months or in 36 months? They've had such a difficulty to kickstart their economy after the pandemic. And you start to think, well, okay, 1 year is, okay, give them 1 year, give them 2 years, give them 3 years. But when you get into sort of the fourth or fifth year, you got to think, is this more of the directionality that Japan went once they hit sort of the 1990s, where they just started to have stagnation and stagflation because, the demographics were working against them? So I do think the China-US issue is huge, but I think China in and of itself is something that, from a Canadian perspective, we're going to have to watch very carefully because we've sort of counted on them for being this market. The world's counted on them for being this market to mop up sort of some of the surplus. I mean, are they going to be that market, when we're sitting here talking in 2031 or something like that? And I think that as much as the U.S. administration matters, I mean, I think China is a huge, huge question mark.
Yeah. Do you expect there to be Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola at some point in 12 months?
If you'd asked me that question a month ago, I probably would have said 100%. Now I'm sort of more down in the 60, 70% range on that, just because it seems like there's been some wording from Canada in and of itself that maybe we're thinking of backing off on our EV tariffs. So that was one of the issues that, again, they're all unrelated things, supposedly. But, I think that's one of the sticks in the mud that China saw and didn't like. And there's really been no word since the initial sort of, hey, we're going to launch an investigation. We saw with Australia, like the investigation did close the doors for barley into China. The whole process lasted 3 or 4 years. And in the end, they came to sort of an agreement, and they decided okay, you're back in, you've got, most favored nation for barley again. I don't know. The other thing I would say is it really seems like China wants and in some ways needs the canola. So they've imported quite a bit more than they imported at this time last year. Apparently their forward buying is still being fairly good. I mean, it's slowed considerably since the announcement was. So I just wonder if there's more ground there for some commonality and perhaps something can be worked out so that we don't go to the more, ballistic state of affairs. And then the other thing I would say is I think one thing that is in favor of Canada maybe not facing the most significant consequences is that the canola balance sheet is tight enough that maybe China doesn't have as much leverage in canola for at least the next 8 to 12 months. We don't know about 25, 26, 26, 27, because remember, if they do start the tariff process in January, it has a multi-year impact because it's such a slow process.
Yeah. How did that canola balance sheet, I've heard a wide range of forecasts in terms of where people think the final yield production number will work out to. I know when we talk to farmers here on Realag Radio, and especially in the Farmer Rapid Fire, disappointment for the most part across the prairies in terms of where the yields were relative to the expectations, even with a dialed back expectation after all that July heat. Do you have a number in mind when it comes to the canola production number?
Yeah, first of all, I love the Farmer Rapid Fire, and we love ground intelligence at Grain Fox. Like we try to feed it up, and it fits very much in line with what I've heard on Realag and other places like that. It was a palatably disappointing crop, this canola. So we've heard some numbers of below 18 million tons. There was an article in, the Western Canadian farm media that said that. We're not there yet. Now, we kind of take a holistic approach to this supply and demand balance. Like things have to make sense to us. So one thing is if you're telling us that farmers only had, and as StatsCan told us, they think that farmers only had like 700,000 or 800,000 tons on farm at the end of 23, 24, like that math doesn't work because they delivered like, 1.5 million tons in the first 4 weeks that we don't believe was, brand new production. We believe that probably came out of the bin or something like that. So, any way that you slice it, you have to figure out that the balance sheet is probably a little bit larger than what StatsCan says. But the production was not good this past year. And so our number is in about the 18.4 million ton range. I wouldn't want to bet very much cryptocurrency on that or any money, gold bars, whatever. I would just say that, the whole balance sheet has to work. And somehow it doesn't work if you're going to go with like a sub 18 million ton production and then the on-farm carry-in that Stats Canada has. Something doesn't really measure out there.
That was Neil Townsend of Grain Fox. Lots happening in the commodity market, indeed. I encourage you to check out that entire conversation with Neil by going to realagriculture.com, or you can, of course, find it on the Real Agriculture YouTube channel or our podcast feeds. This is one of those weeks where, quite frankly, very much a whirlwind. Lots happening, and over the next coming weeks, we're going to have more and more to talk about and break down. And a lot of it is focused on what happens with the outcome of the U.S. election, the impact on that on Canadian trade, and some potential threads and streams we take there. We've also got the Ag Minister, Minister McCauley, on a very quiet trip to China as well. Now, farm groups were told about it, but the government's been very quiet about it, and honestly, we've been trying to get confirmation from Macaulay's office with no response. But he's on a China trip relative to Chinese tariffs on canola, as I chatted with Neil Townsend there from Grain Fox. Now, if you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. shaney@realagriculture.com. Thank you so much for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag on the weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week. Cheers, everybody.